when we think about the automation of labor, it's not just a case of robots coming in and sweeping us all away. What automation does is drive down the price of labor. Essentially, it serves as the ultimate low-cost labor source without having to go overseas. It's not you're not outsourcing to India or to Vietnam. You're outsourcing to the IT department. And so what happens is that wages, values get driven down. Wages get driven down, and people become less able to afford to buy consumer goods. So there is an inherent dilemma for industrial capitalism as well. If you're trying to reduce your costs by employing machines that don't call in sick, don't jump off the roof, can be reprogrammed to do something new every time without incurring significant retraining costs. If you're doing that to lower your cost and increase your profit, how do you sell things? And it's not just a case of how do you sell things to people who don't have work. How do you sell things to people who don't make a living wage any longer? And I think that's going to be one of the big dilemmas we wrestle with over the course of the next couple of decades. I'm a great believer in guaranteed basic income guarantee, various ways of phrasing it, as a way of dealing with a world of increased automation and a world where we have no ability to update ourselves because we can update the skills of our machines faster than we can update the skills of our workers. Now, it's not the only scenario out there, but it's the one that has I think the most weight to it. People have been talking about basic income guarantees for years. Richard Nixon proposed one in 1971 and 72. We don't think of Nixon in that way, but that was actually something that he thought would be a good idea. Alaska has what is effectively a basic income guarantee with its permanent oil treasury. And so the idea of essentially having getting a wage for living your life is something that's actually not just a pittance, but something you can live on and live decently on. That is very disruptive because people can't really figure out where it fits. You have people saying, well, that's very socialist, but you have really strong libertarians who are believing in this, who believe this and they're not thinking necessarily as a government stipend, but as something that we do collaborate. But it answers that basic question of how do you maintain a functioning economy in a world where the basic input of labor is increasingly being done by capital. And it's sort of a really funky thing if you take that classic Marxian perspective, that understanding of how the economy works, land, labor, capital, where capital is taking over for labor. How do you continue to have a functioning economy? Well, there have been a couple of models of socioeconomic change. One has been the deployment of technologies to allow people to take on the kind of power they couldn't have had before because they can essentially leapfrog over the existing institutions. And the other is at the barrel of a gun. Violent revolution has been a source of socioeconomic change. And we can't rule that out going forward. And that's the big question is, it's not just, what do we figure out as a way of dealing with all this and we'll get around to it. It's how can we deal with all this before the situation gets bad enough that somebody decides to pick up a gun or somebody decides to print out a gun. I think one of the characteristics about labor that helps to influence what kinds of jobs will be automated and what won't be is, I'm trying to think what the word would be, because it's not algorithmability. How readily can you turn the processes of this job into an algorithm, into something, a regular set of rules that then have a logical outcome. We think about algorithms as that's just code. Well, we're increasingly seeing that kind of code being translated into real world effects with smart contracts and the like, where you essentially are replacing legal language with algorithmic language. So if you are thinking in terms of if-then statements, to put it very crudely, if you're thinking in terms of code, what kinds of jobs can you turn into code? What kinds of, it's not just replicability or repeatability, or it's not just doing the same thing over and over again. It's having a really clear set of rules of if this happens, then do that. That's why we see, for example, surgery having seeing an increasing role for automated and semi-automated systems. Because surgery has very clear rules. If this happens, you need to do that. And we won't in the near future see completely automated surgery, but within a generation, probably. Because it's the kind of thing that if you have a fast enough system, and that's something that machines really have going for them. They can operate much more quickly, they can see and respond much more quickly than a human can. You have these systems that can take on the role of assistants, and then from there take on a role of being the dominant presence. So anything that has clear rules, law, basically you're going to see more and more of our legal activity being handled by machinery, handled by software. There's already a problem of having too many lawyers from a law school perspective. People graduating from law school don't have anywhere to go. And that's only going to get worse because we're going to find it's a lot cheaper to have software handle the, at first, the relatively easy stuff, and then the moderately complex stuff. And then the stuff that's just essentially going through and saying, this is what the rule says, so this is what we need to do. Again, you're not going to have somebody arguing a murder trial, or you're not going to have software arguing a murder trial anytime soon. But the rest of that's not the majority of things that lawyers do. That's the flashiest. It's a TV version of lawyers, but it's not the real world version of lawyers. Real world lawyers do a lot of basic figuring out how an action or a situation matches the rules of law. The kinds of economic circumstances, the kind of economic models and institutions who support something like a basic income guarantee, the most obvious would be, for lack of a better term, robot taxes. You replace, from a corporate point of view, you replace the cost of your payroll with the cost of social support taxes that you pay on the basis of for each robot. And that's a really crude idea, but it gives a sense of where the income for that kind of society might emerge. We're having robots take our jobs? Great, more power to them. And they pay to support us, essentially. Especially if you get into the whole world of self-owning autonomous systems, which I know there's a lot of talk about that in the Bitcoin blockchain world. Do you have, do those things, what taxes do those things pay, those entities pay? And so that's one more or less obvious route that can be taken. I suspect that other alternatives to support a basic income type society will probably be based on. I suspect that other alternatives for supporting a basic income society will likely be based on the proliferation of general purpose 3D printing. Something where you have, whether it's atomically precise manufacturing or something that lets you have whatever stuff you want at essentially no or very, very low cost, with the caveat that it better be recyclable, because otherwise you're going to end up with trash mounts everywhere. We've all seen Wall-E. So if you have a world where it's the classic abundant society, end of scarcity, which really isn't technically an end of scarcity until you can replicate planets. Think land, labor, capital. Well, if you have robots doing labor and you have 3D printers making all the capital you want, you're still limited on land. And you want a really nice view. Well, not everyone can have a really nice view. So, anyway, if you have something where you can have that kind of replication technology, you have the ability to make whatever stuff is desired, where cost is no longer a factor, then that would go a long way to supporting what would essentially be a basic income society, although at that point it would probably be a post-currency society or a post-money society. There are two fiction models that I think actually operate very, give really nice examples of what this could look like. The first is what Star Trek looked like in the Next Generation era, where people are out there doing things. They're exploring, they're learning, they're engaging in labor of different kinds, but it's not on the basis of financial returns, it's the basis of wanting to better themselves. It actually seems like a relatively plausible version of a mature post-scarcity society. But the one I really love is The Culture from Ian Banks. And I would if you haven't read any of the Culture novels, strongly recommend these. They were outstanding. Unfortunately, Banks died about less than a year ago. But his vision of what a world would look like, or what a galaxy would look like, of sardonic, super intelligent AIs and people who just want to go out and explore, or want to have fun, or want to take drugs and have sex. That is both, it's terrifyingly appealing, because I can totally imagine loving that world, and just simply can't yet imagine how we go from here to there, because the disruptions to our traditional locuses of power, the disruptions to the models of how we engage in economic behavior, how we engage in political behavior, those are going to fight. They're going to fight really hard to make a post-scarcity world not happen. Because post-scarcity is, to a really large degree, a post-power world. Power is really a differential, it's a relative, power is really a relative phenomenon. It's whether I have, my power levels are over 9,000 or whatever, it's really, what matters is what's my power relative to yours? Economic, political, social power, cultural power. And in a world where you can make anything, where you can communicate anything, where you can do nothing or anything or everything, that's a world where those mechanisms of power no longer work. And finally, when you get to the point where you can ignore land, where you can just leave, then all sources of power are gone. Because if you don't like a situation, you can leave it. And if you don't like what someone else is doing, you can ignore them. You can blank them out of your existence entirely, and they can blank you out. And you can have a perfectly happy existence, perfectly happy life, doing anything you want, and never having to step on somebody else's toes. At that point, in that post-scarcity, post-power society, the only time you have a conflict is when somebody wants to engage in conflict, not as the unfortunate side effect of a disagreement. Well, actually, we already have robot, semi-autonomous cameras operating for news studios, where they are able to, track the movement, because of the rules, the scripts that have been given to them. They know who's going to be talking next, be able to set up, so camera one is focusing on one person, camera two moves around to ready to focus on the other. That happens, that's going to get more and more common. There will be a point within your lifetime where your job as a documentarian will be seen as a kind of eccentricity, like a hipster using a manual typewriter in a coffee shop. Sorry.
Oh, well, hopefully by then I won't need to. I'll just do it for fun.
Yes, which is one of the things that people sometimes forget about. When you talk about a world where maybe there's a basic income guarantee, or people have the ability to live a decent life but aren't necessarily tied to a particular daily job, it's a world that has the opportunity for much more fun. One of the models I have in mind when I think about what could this kind of future look like? If things work right, what could this future look like? Actually, Burning Man is what comes to mind. A society that isn't around, it's a temporary society, but it's one that's not based around trade. It's based around artistic interaction, taking drugs and having sex. Which, if you think about it, that's pretty much the kind of ideal for what you want to do on a vacation. And if the vacation is what is the rest of your life, you spend your time making art and having fun, this is not a bad future.
Yeah, we have Burning Seed in Australia, which is on now, and we also have Confest, which is on twice a year usually. So I've been to Confest quite a few times. And yeah, people think it's all drugs, sex, but there's a lot of naked hippies running around, but it is fun.
It's fun, you have the naked hippies running around, but at least with the Burning Man, and I suspect with the ones you're talking about as well. You say what is called the seed? Oh, Burning
There's
Seed.
Burning Seed and Confest.
Confess?
Confest.
Oh, Confest.
Yeah.
I suspect with these, there's also a very strong presence of artistic creation. People making enormous art cars or giant automations, and automata, and dressing in weird costumes, and that's because it's an opportunity to express themselves in a way that they wouldn't get to in the normal day-to-day workplace, even if they do maker type stuff professionally. And that's the kind of thing that I think can be really validating for people, really enjoyable for people, and would make for a decent future. Yes, there'll be people who want to be entrepreneurs, people who want to go explore the world, explore the galaxy, and a lot of people who want to sit around and play video games. And that's fine, but I suspect what we'll see, especially after the first generation, as the second and third generations start to emerge, and people who grew up in this kind of world, they spend a lot of time making art. So when you think about seeing 4,000 ads a day, that includes things like an ad on the back of a magazine, a billboard out the window as you're driving by. It also means the commercials that you hear on the radio, the commercials that you see on television, the commercials that are at the beginning of a movie when you go to the movie theater, the ads that pop up on your phone, on your web browser, the kinds of things that you might not even think of as an advertisement, but are essentially commercial communication. We've become resistant to, we've developed an immunity to that. We don't pay attention to it. And that, for advertisers, is a problem. But what they do as a response becomes our problem, because they attempt to break through that immunity, break through that that cultivated ignorance by using spectacle, by making things loud and flashy and take over your screen. What I've seen happen quite often is the replacement of traditional print billboards with animated television billboards that swap in different ads every 30 seconds and are flashy and are really bright at night. And that's great for advertisers because they get your attention, but it's terrible if you're driving, and it's a distraction. And so one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is what happens as we start to embrace more tools for filtering our world. So whether we're talking in next generation Google Glass or Microsoft HoloLens or something like that, or the kinds of really interesting tools for filtering out sounds that are in development. What happens as we start to employ ad blockers in those tools? Because we will employ ad blockers in those tools. If I can walk around the streets and wearing my next generation Google Glass or whatever, and I can block out the sight of any billboard, any advertising around me. Maybe I replace it with famous works of art. Maybe I just replace it with big white spaces. It doesn't matter. I can control what I see, and I can get away from that persistent inundation of advertising. And that's part of the big question about what happens next. How do you achieve successful commercial communication in a capitalist society if people are intentionally blocking out contact with your advertising? And when we get inundated by 4,000 ads a day, and we learn to avoid what we can through our own mental, cognitive filtering, eventually we're going to be developing machine assistants for that as well.